Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. And I'm George Spins. This evening we're going to get all sorts of smarts about intuitive guidance and health energy healing. And to help us understand it better is a practitioner of both, Leah Hill.
Hi, George.
Thank you, Leah.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So we start with, I guess, intuitive medium or intuitive guidance. When you talk about intuitive, what do you mean by intuitive? Because I have a different concept of it, I think.
Well, typically what we think about using our intuition is getting information that goes beyond the five senses that we're familiar with, you know, the seeing and touching and taste and hearing. And it's a way of using a different sense, sometimes called the sixth sense, to receive information of things that might not be seen with the physical eyes or hear, you know, things you can hear with your ears.
Yeah. So how did you get into this business of intuitive?
Well, it was a long journey for me. I have been an intuitive and a medium since I was pretty young, since I was a small child. I remember being able to see things and hear things that other people couldn't. And for me, it was uncomfortable. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't really talk about it. So I tried to ignore it or shut it down for most of my life growing up. And then as I got older, I started a journey of really, it's self-acceptance. It's a journey of being able to accept myself for who I was and then learn how to actually use the abilities that I have.
Well, I have a hard time understanding what you're talking about because my perception of intuitive is something that it's really ingrained in your system way back when. You just really can't put a finger on.
Yep.
That's when I discovered this. But it's something that's rattling around between your ears, and it just pops up at different times.
Yes.
And to me, that's intuitive. But what you're saying is you're picking up signals, if you will, or messages from someplace, and you can, I guess, control where you get them from. Because, for instance, you get into this game of intuitive guidance. Somebody's got a concern, and they come to you and say, this is my concern. How do you help them?
So the way I work is, right now I work over the phone, and because of my abilities to see with my inner sight, sort of like the way that you would see with your imagination. You can imagine something that's not right in front of you. That's the way that I see, and I see with light. And then at the same time, I become a vessel of divine light energy. So when we think about beings such as angels or ascended masters, or sometimes our loved ones who have passed on and they're on the other side, I can see them, I can hear them, I can get information from them. So when someone comes to me with an issue or a concern or a problem, I tune in for that guidance. So it's not coming from me, it's coming through me.
Would you have some way to control who you're talking to or who you're listening to?
Yes. Yes,
So,
I do that really from the years of experience. The intuition that you were referring to a few minutes ago, we all have, you're right. You know, things that you just spontaneously know something, you don't understand where it came from or how you know it. We all do have it. I think the difference is that just that I've done a lot of study and a lot of research and a lot of experience to learn to control it, so that I know when I'm connecting with particular angels who I'm connecting with.
Okay. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, how do they do it?
So if they're looking to reach out to me, they can just go to my website, which is my name, leahmhill.com, and it has all the information on there. It has some other videos that I've done, how I work, and some of the other practices that I do and the classes that I do and information like that. Yes.
Well, one of the things I think I picked up in some of your background is you're into these sacred symbols. Now, what are those? Or where do they come from, I guess?
So sacred geometry is a general term.
Okay.
I refer to them as sacred shapes, are what we call language of light. It's really the language of the universe. It's how the entire universe, including ourselves, is actually put together. So if you think about the formation of the petals on a rose, right, the rose petals, that is what we call sacred geometry. If we think about the orbits of the planets, sacred geometry, or Da Vinci's image of Vitruvian Man that he drew back in the 1500s, all those shapes around that human body is sacred geometry. So it's a language of light that we are made of and that the world is made of. And I use it in my work because it makes my work even more powerful and more immediate and more helpful to people.
Well, how do you use it in your work?
So what I do is basically just through the imagination that I was talking about, seeing with my inner sight. When I'm working with someone, I can see the person's energy field. So just as I'm looking at you now, what I would see when I'm working with you is your light body. I would see basically the silhouette of you with light, and I would see colors, and I would see energy moving. And what I do is use the sacred geometry symbols in certain places depending on what you need in that moment. So sometimes people just need to feel like they need to release some energy, of emotional energy. Maybe it's an energy of grief or anxiety or depression. So things like that, using those sacred shapes that I can energetically put around the person or use within the person really clears their energy, and they feel different right away.
So you can redefine the person in terms of these shapes.
Yeah, I don't know if it's redefining the person. It's really the person. It's really the person helping me in my work. is what I say. So it's a collaboration of me as the vessel, the divine love energy that I connect with, and the person who's working together with me.
So it makes you see them in a different light or a different perspective.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
And the other part of your repertoire is energy healing. And you're a master of Reiki?
Yes.
What's Reiki?
So Reiki is a modality or practice of healing that has been around for the last several thousands of years, that initiated back in Asia. And it's a practice of energy healing, basically what I described before, where the person who's called the healer is allowing divine light energy to come through their body and heal the person. So it can be done with their hands, the person's hands, or it can be done with distance. They don't need to be physically with the person. And basically what it is you go through trainings, you go through initiations to attune yourself to be able to conduct this energy. But when you really what it really comes down to is you're not, like, I am not the healer. It's the person receiving the healing, that their energy and their body is what's doing the healing. But we call ourselves healer because I guess we don't have another word for it. But
well, again, I guess it's based on energy flows within the body. They did a little research on this stuff, and acupuncture is probably the more common one that people have heard about. And certain energy centers, you work with the same process?
Similar, yes. Whereas acupuncture works with the needles, or sometimes acupressure works with actual pressure on the body. What I do is look at the channels of energy energetically, like in my inner vision, and then I can use sacred geometry or other tools or the Reiki to help move that energy along. So when we talk about, even in acupuncture, blocks that might be causing physical pain, it's very similar to that. It can relieve those blocks so that the energy moves and flows.
So what kind of symptoms can you treat with this energy healing?
A whole range of things. So I work with a lot of clients who struggle with emotional issues such as anxiety, overwhelm, depression, or dealing with major life changes, things like relationship change or change in their career, even moving, that things that can be upsetting to the person or disturbing them emotionally. I help people with that. And I've also helped people with physical pain in the sense that it's the working with the emotions behind the physical pain, too.
Well, when you say you're working with the emotions behind it, the physical pain really doesn't go away. It's what? Do they get to the point of accepting it or not having it so prominent in their life?
It can be. It actually can go away. So I was working with someone recently who was experiencing a lot of tightness in her chest and chest pain. Went to the doctors. They did all the tests. They couldn't find anything wrong, and they said, "You're just too stressed. You're too stressed out." So when she came to me, energetically, I saw the contraction of the energy, the compression of it, and worked with her to identify something actually that happened many years ago in her childhood that her mother had said to her that was painful and hurt her heart, and it was coming up again now in her adult life because of things happening in her life. So once we released that energy, that tightness, it went away, and she felt better immediately.
So I guess now we're getting into the realm of what is the threshold or the boundary between what you're doing and psychoanalysis?
Well, actually, the work that I do, I say, does not substitute any other work. So if someone is in therapy or has been in therapy, I say stay in therapy. You know, if that's working for you, don't stop doing that. But the work with me adds to that. It makes everything easier, more immediate. Like when I work with people, they notice the changes in the energy field immediately. And then there's also long-term things. There might be things that would help them progress the healing later. But so I say that my work adds to whatever else someone is doing.
Okay, so it's an adjunct process. Just one more trick in the bag, if you will, to how do you get to some of these problems, or how do you work on them? And I guess everybody's problems are somewhat different, and some things, like the example you're just mentioning, where a lady had a comment made to her in childhood that apparently just went over her head, didn't register at all, but it really did. And it came back at an inopportune time.
Right.
So I'm guessing that what you're doing is taking an immediate problem that really has long roots.
It could, yes.
And unraveling that to the point where it's not a problem in her current life, because apparently she got over it when she was a kid.
Well, yeah, it hurt her at the time, but yes, then she was able to kind of put it aside and go on with her life, but she didn't realize it was still affecting her.
She didn't put it far enough aside.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you think about it, we are more than what we see in our physical bodies, right?
Yeah.
We have energy bodies, we have a soul, we have a higher self, we have all these different, we have our whole energy field. So we have all these different things happening and going on throughout our lives, right? And then the older we get, the more experiences we have, things kind of pile on over the years.
Yeah.
So what happens is sometimes we just need to kind of clear that out and say, oh, you know what, that happened, it was in the past, I'm going to put that behind me so that I can move forward in my life. And sometimes that's the work that I do.
That raises an interesting question of, if you put it away one time, how did it creep out from behind the locked door or wherever you stuffed it? You know?
Well, sometimes it occurs when something in our adult life triggers that, right? So if there was something like with this woman that happened a long time ago, and then she goes on with her life and she, has a career and a marriage and all that and has kids, but then something similar happens, maybe with a person who reminds her of her mother or someone that she works with, that triggers that. So it doesn't actually go away until it is actually released.
Yeah.
It was still there.
Well, I get into similar kinds of things. I can remember jokes for some reason. And somebody will make a comment, and in the back of my head that rings the bell of, oh, that's the punchline to such and such kind of thing. And I can experience that kind of thing, and if I don't tell the joke right away, it's gone again.
Right.
And I can't recall it. It just, and so to some extent I know what you mean, but in a different perspective kind of thing. So I can imagine they get there. Another one of your great talents is you're an author.
Yes.
And you brought your book with us.
I did.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so this is a novel about
It's about sylphs. It's called the Society of Sylphs.
Yeah, start off with what's a sylph?
What's a sylph, right? A sylph is an elemental being of the air. So a lot of times we're more familiar with things like gnomes. You know, if you heard of like a gnome, that would be an elemental being of the earth. A sylph is an elemental being of the air. Some people think they're like fairies of the air or beings of the air that travel.
Okay.
And so the novel is about a young boy with autism who is nonverbal. And so you read his thoughts and you read what he would say if he could speak.
Yeah.
And the sylph, her job is to deliver messages to humans. So she needs to, especially because humans don't always hear her and see her. So humans, she has to get creative with how she delivers messages to humans. And these messages could be anything from people or something they need to know, or could be anything.
Yeah. So this novel that you created, does it apply to, because you mentioned in there it's about autism, and you mentioned you have an interest in autism.
Right.
What's the connection?
So for me, the connection was because when I was experiencing my intuitive abilities and being a medium when I was a child and withdrawn, that the connection was that I didn't have the ability or couldn't speak or didn't want to speak about what was really going on. So later in my life, I actually had a career in the field of autism, working with adults 18 and over who were able to, some of them were verbal, some nonverbal, and some, anywhere in between. And I really felt a strong connection with the population because I can understand the need to express yourself, the need to feel like when you feel all the feelings, but you don't know how to say it and you don't know what to express.
Well, what were you doing? Were you a therapist and all?
No, I was working in programming. So I worked actually in the adult education field and special needs, and I worked in the autism division for the state of Massachusetts.
Well, what did you do there?
I was doing program coordination, so helping adults with things like, day programs, finding jobs, getting adult services and help that they need.
Well, autism is kind of a funny procedure that it ranges quite wide.
Yes.
And I'm used to Temple Grandin.
Oh, yes.
And she is one example of somebody who was extremely autistic.
Right.
And at the same time manages to do some spectacular things.
She does.
I think one of the things that always surprised me about her is that she got a doctorate in animal science, and 70% of the animal processing equipment in the United States is designed by her company.
Right.
Not just her company.
Right.
And something like 40% of the stuff in the world is designed by her. And one of her stories that I remember is she can imagine what the cow is seeing and thinking as it goes up the ramp to the slaughterhouse.
Right.
And how different things, the example she uses, if somebody leaves a jacket hanging on a fence and the cow goes by, it's liable to spook the cow. And once you spook one of them, I mean, the whole herd of them that is coming along is, so the ability to have that kind of imagination, or the one she uses is thinking in pictures, is her one of her themes.
Yes.
That it's a kind of autism, I guess. It's a kind of a characteristic.
Right, right. That's why they call it a spectrum, because there's a whole range. There are no two people alike who have autism. And I've had the pleasure of being able to meet her too, and
really?
speak. Yeah, and also hear her speak. And what she talks about is we think differently. It doesn't mean we're less than. We just think differently. We process differently. So when she's writing her books or talking about how she can see what the cow is seeing, she is talking about or giving examples of how it's different than what we perceive.
Yeah, and this whole idea of thinking in pictures. I'm an engineer by trade, and in a lot of cases, I have to imagine what this thing that doesn't exist yet is going to look like.
Right.
And it's the same game of thinking in pictures.
Exactly.
And the way I like to explain it, the reason I don't have Asperger's anymore is because they took it out of DSM-5.
Right. Right. I was working for the state when that happened, actually. Yes. Yes.
So I think different professions get into that game of how do you imagine what you, that's what an artist is doing. You got a blank canvas and you've got to be able to see the picture that's going to appear on that blank canvas after you wave at it with the wet brush with the ink in it or the paint in it. Yeah.
Right.
So,
right.
Again, getting back to this intuitive healing, how do you help somebody who is autistic? Because you focused on that in the book.
Well, the way that I typically would do is basically first just in the understanding and having compassion, which is what a lot of I felt the people that I worked with really needed, because I know what it's like to feel like you don't fit in, right?
Yeah.
So I know what it's like to feel like, you know, I lonely or don't have friends or, you know, just uncomfortable in society and in the world, not knowing what the right thing is to do. And so just by working with people like that, I was able to feel a connection with them where maybe, you know, the individual might have opened up to me or talked to me more or had a different reaction to me because I can understand that perspective.
Yeah. So how is autism being treated in the state? Is it working well? Is it not? Because it's kind of an open subject that every so often you'll hear something that, oh, they did this again, and they can't possibly do that anymore.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Yeah, so what's your perspective on how?
So my perspective is the state of Massachusetts does a really good job, and that's from being in it and working with it. They do a good job of trying to help support people in their environment. So it's not about, you know, segregating people or treating them differently. It's about allowing someone to have a career, have a job, and do what they need to do, and be able to pay for, you know, their own apartment and have a fulfilling life. And they might just need some supports for that. And so that's what I appreciate about what we do here in the state.
Well, give me some examples of how do you actually support someone who's autistic and needs help?
So a good example is actually in a college program that I helped develop. So a lot of individuals who might be on a certain point of the autism spectrum are able to get into school because they have great grades or great scores on their tests, but then they get into college without that structure of high school that they've had for all those years, and then they would fall apart because they don't have the what we call executive functioning skills, so the ability to prioritize the projects or what they need to do or their homework. And in addition to that, a whole new social environment on top of that. So the supports might be a staff person who comes and checks in with them, not following them around campus all the time, but maybe checks in with them a certain number of hours a week and says, hey, how you doing? Are you getting up in the morning and going to class? Are you taking your meds? Are you, doing what you need to do to be able to succeed on campus? That's an example of what we do.
You know, one of the blogs I get is from my cousin's daughter, and she's a Uber driver in South Kingston, Rhode Island, and a lot of her customers are students at URI, and that's where I went to school, and it's still pretty much known as UR High, and there is a significant change in the environment from high school to college, at least to that one, where the students are really running loose. And I can imagine that somebody who doesn't have the executive function, doesn't have the control to say, hey, I got to be in class at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, party's over, I'm going to bed, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they would need a lot of help. And I'm not sure that they're getting it, or getting as much as they need.
Yeah, probably not as much, but it's there now that it wasn't there years ago. So we're on a good track with that.
So back to your basic business. you are in business, right?
Yes.
You are making a living doing this.
Yes.
Okay. So if somebody wants to contact you, they dial up your phone on the Facebook page,
My website. Yep.
website.
Yep.
And what happens next?
So on my website, you can, like I said, learn all the information about what I do. But if you choose to book a session with me, there's a tab right there. It says book a session, and you pay for it. And then within 24 hours, you get an email that says, hey, here's some open times I have available, and we schedule it. You get a confirmation. The session takes place over the phone. You can also get a recording of it as well, an audio recording.
Yeah.
So that this way I work with people all over the country and a few other countries as well. You don't have to worry about being on camera, or being at your desk or being somewhere at a certain time. You can be at home, relaxed, and be able to just tune into the energy. And then with the recording, you can always save it to your computer and listen to it anytime.
Yeah. So we get an introduction to this. What do you do with the first session?
So the first session, usually before I even start the recording, I just get an idea from the person of if they have any experience with their own intuition, if something that they might want to focus on. And then once we get into the work, let's say they could, it might be something like someone I worked with recently who said she had a fear of dogs, dogs that were not the little dogs, but the big dogs, had a fear of big dogs. Okay, so we started with that, and then it could lead to something else, that happened again with her childhood or her family situation or something where that the emotional distress of the dogs was related to something else in her life. And so once we clear that, then she's able to be around dogs without being in fear.
For instance, on a sequence like that, how many sessions would it normally take to get the person from a fear of dogs to being at least comfortable with them?
It could be one.
It could be one.
It could be one session.
Yeah.
And for something that's a very a deep emotional trauma, like if the person was abused, it has a lot of layers to it, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of emotional layers. So that probably takes more than one session because there's all kinds of emotions to deal with, not only the person who abused you, but the people who were like family members who were supposed to protect you, and then yourself, and then, so there's a lot involved in it that might take more than that.
So it's not too bad to get into. It's easy.
Right.
It's easy.
Right.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And if you have any comments, you'll notice at the end of the credits is my email address. Please send them along. And if you have some deeper thoughts that you want to express, there's always room for you here at the table. And thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.